Okay, thank you, Mbak Yuli, for giving me the first person to address this class. First of all, yang terhormat Bapak Dr. Wawan Marsudi, the Dean of Faculty of Social and Political Science Jabar University. Yang terhormat Bapak Dr. Dafri Agus Salim, Executive Director of Asean Studies Center. Excellency Bapak Dr. Gusti Agung Wesaka Puja, distinguished guests, college, friends, and students. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang dan salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Well, on this very happy occasions, allow me to convey on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs my highest gratitude and appreciation to Gadjah Mada University Yogyakarta, in particular to Visipol UGM and the Asean Studies Center for the excellent initiative and activities to organize this public lecture series. The theme of the reflection of ASEAN then and now is part of the commemoration of the 54th anniversary of ASEAN. This program, I believe, will be encouraging increased awareness among youth and students about ASEAN. Secondly, I am personally very happy to be involved in this program, because this is like a dream come true for me, because once I was also a student in Gadjah Mada University and Visipol, and I still believe I ever experienced sitting in the class with Pak Dafri giving the lecture at the time. At that time, he is still assistant of the lecturer. So this is very good moment for me. Thank you for inviting me. And then this activity is also expected to encourage an increase in the role of youth, according to the theme today is fostering youth initiative in ASEAN development, which carries the spirit of ASEAN unity and integrity. It offers a productive activity that focuses on the community, especially the youth, to affirm ASEAN identity. ASEAN youth has a high level of mobility, especially with the rapid advancement of the technology. They are also the main actors in some productions, chains, and businesses within the region. So in this regard, I would like to convey some messages from our ministry as follows. You know, last year at the ASEAN Summit, before ASEAN Summit in October 22, at the ASEAN Cultural Meeting, all ASEAN members countries approved Indonesia initiative to become the lead country in an effort to increase creative industry cooperation in ASEAN. So in this regard, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in collaboration with the Ministry of Education and Culture, as well as with the Ministry of Tourism and Creative Economy, plans to hold an ASEAN regional workshop on creative economy in 2021 in Yogyakarta. But due to the current pandemic situations, this plan will be rescheduled to next year, inshallah. Hopefully, the situation will improve next year so that we can hold the ASEAN regional workshop on the creative economy in 2022. This is a form of our commitment to support Yogyakarta, which is named the ASEAN City of Culture back in 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, later at the ASEAN Summit meeting on November 2020, all the ASEAN heads of state also adopted another Indonesian initiative, namely the narrative of ASEAN identity. This narrative identifies elements of ASEAN identity that are part of our identity, which consists of values rooted in socio-cultural values that are passed down from generation to generation and enriched by economic and political values constructed by humans. This opportunity, I would like to say again special thanks to UGM Asean Studies Center, who plays a vital role in the early stages of formulating the first draft of ASEAN identity narration. and keep contributing until the final document is agreed and submitted as one of the ASEAN Summit documents outcome last year. And just like to remind also that Indonesia will chair the ASEAN on 2023. So just the next 2 years. So we're still hoping that ASEAN Study Centers in Gajah Mada, also in the other university, will still keeping their contribution to help us making deliveries during the Indonesian chairmanship in the ASEAN. And so I would like to conclude this remark by saying, let us together support the city of Yogyakarta as an icon of a creative economy based on ASEAN culture and identity. Thank you very much, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Ahmad, for the remarks and kind words. I now have the pleasure of inviting the Program Director of SHAPEC. SHAPEC is short for Strengthening Human Rights and Peace Research and Education in ASEAN, Southeast Asia, Mr. Joel Mark Barredo. Mr. Joel, I present you the floor.
Thank you very much, Shalida, and it's really my pleasure and honor to be speaking on behalf of our program. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome and to gladly welcome our participants as well as our distinguished guests to the 2021 ASEAN Youth Initiative Empowerment Program with the theme Fostering Youth's Initiative in ASEAN Development. SHAPEC, the SHAPEC program was established in 2015, 6 years ago. It's driven by a vision of the creation of a culture of human rights and peace in Southeast Asia. It seems abstract, but during the past 6 years, we did that through applied research, enabling education as well as informed advocacy. And we did this by partnering with different universities, academic institutions, civil society organizations, as well as with relevant national and regional government bodies. Our theory of change has always been to create a regional hub for human rights and peace champions in Southeast Asia. And indeed, partnering with the Asean Studies Center at the University of Gajah Mada is a great step forward to achieving this theory of change. Our philosophy is realizing academic activism which deviates from the normal or from the usual academic task of just creating knowledge. But we would also want to imbibe a culture of an academic culture of problematizing existing knowledge, creating new knowledge, as well as disseminating knowledge through advocacy in various levels. And indeed, this program, we hope would enable our participants into becoming academic activists themselves. Based on the theme, let me just quickly reflect on the past and the present and the future condition in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN. Again, happy ASEAN Day to everyone. I'd also like to remind everyone that ASEAN, compared to our human years, is relatively young, 54 years old. Maybe in human years, it's entering its graduate studies phase. It was created to promote political, economic, and cultural development. We've seen throughout the years that it has indeed fostered many of its of goals. It has become a legal entity itself more than a decade ago. And we see ASEAN as a potential body in order to promote and protect human rights and as well as to build peace within the region. I would also like to remind everyone that today we commemorate the 88 uprising in Myanmar, in Burma, Myanmar. And we need to also, and this reminds us of the power of students, of young people, in reminding governments about the importance of democracy and the need to fight for human rights and peace towards the end. While we also commemorate the lives of those the lost lives during that uprising, but also the people who bravely fought for the democracy in their country. Now, for the present, we are faced by the crisis of the pandemic, and we all are affected by that. But it also reminded us that the systemic inequalities that every person faces on a daily basis, and it's something that we need to address, and we need to put in mind while we undertake this program. Now, in the future, ShapeC, on our 6th-year anniversary, we thought of the theme Shaping a Better Normal. And it's something that we are still defining. We are still navigating. What do we mean by a better normal? I think for this program, we think that a better normal is shaped by education and constructive discourse. And I think through this and through our participants, we would be able to create a vaccine against any attempts, present or future, to weaken the social, economic, and cultural health of Southeast Asian peoples. Finally, I'd like to also remind everyone and to put in your minds about the people who cannot access this space. Because only through that, only by engaging them, only by thinking, only by putting in mind their concerns and their needs, that we'd be able to achieve true development, only by the ownership of the people of the ASEAN and of Southeast Asia as a region, that will be able to foster development in the ASEAN region. Thank you very much. I bid everyone good luck and stay safe to everyone. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Joel, for your insightful remark. Last but certainly not least, I would like to invite the Executive Director of the ASEAN Studies Center to deliver his remarks. Dafri Abdul Salim, I present you the floor.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I got a problem with the thing. Hang on. Okay, once again, Senior Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador I Gusti Agung Wesaka Puja, is our senior and also one who played a very important role in establishment of the ASEAN Study Center Universitas Gadjah Mada. And then secondly, Ms. Yu Yun, Wahyu Ningrum, thank you very much for consistently support the program of the ISJ so far. And also my old friends, I'm just aware, Mr. Ahmad Dahlan, and then Mr. Jul Barido, and my colleagues Dio Tobing. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. It is my pleasure to welcome all the esteemed guests as well as our participants to this public lecture. As you might know, today coincided with the 54th anniversary of ASEAN foundings. Hence, this public lecture carries a theme as a reflection of ASEAN then and now, as we hope that on this occasion, we all can carefully reflect on what we have been taught as an ASEAN nation. Over the past 5 decades, ASEAN has grown into a region that could expand its leverage while still maintaining its principles of mutual respect and cooperation. There are so many challenges and opportunities that we have faced together within 45 years. From the rapid economic growth and regional development, Industrial Revolution 4.0, and of course, the most recent one, the COVID-19 pandemic. This series of events occurs in the ASEAN has somehow proved that the ASEAN can still grow positively, although there are few things that can hinder all member countries in implementing regional principles and values. However, ASEAN can still get through all the challenges by strengthening the regional cooperation. esteemed guests, and dear participants. Our public lecture today is also the kick-off events of the third ASEAN Youth Initiative Empowerment Program, AYIP. And this is one of the iconic program of the ASEAN Study Center, actually. And this is for the third time we conducted this program, which unfortunately should be conducted virtually due to the current pandemic. This third course is also one of the flagship program organized by ASEAN Study Center UGM, which is always attended by international students who come not only from ASEAN countries, but also several non-ASEAN countries. And this year's AYIP is carrying a theme on fostering youth initiative in ASEAN development, along with the spirit of ASEAN unity and integrity. We clearly see that the youth are a very strategic group within the development of ASEAN, especially when facing the challenges within the Industrial 4.0. I believe that the youth will play a big role in guiding the ASEAN nation to face all the challenges offered by the Industrial Revolution 4.0 through creating innovations and attempt to develop the region. I believe all participants know that the IEP offer a productive activities that focus on the community, especially the youth, to advance ASEAN identity. Moreover, the courses are designed to provide participants with the knowledge and skill to understand deeper about the dynamic of ASEAN, as well as to encourage the youth to take part in effort to build a better ASEAN. Hence, the participants are expected to strengthen the voice of ASEAN youth as the basic for developing a more meaningful ASEAN identity and create a generation of ASEAN future leaders with a strong vision. I hope all participants can learn about the different initiatives through our planning activities, classes, and specialist event where you will be able to join and get hands-on experiences within the next 5 weeks. I also wish AYIP can be used as a forum where participants can expand their network, share ideas and experiences, and at the same time, a place for learning for young people to contribute their thoughts and get involved in the ASEAN development. We are also proud to announce that this year, AYIP is being conducted along with the cooperation with the ASEAN IPR, CIPC, and ASEAN Youth Forum. So now, let me conclude by reciting a remarkable quote from Sukarno, the Indonesian first president, that say, "Give me 1,000 of all men, I will surely pull Semeru from its root. Give me 10 youths, I will undoubtedly shake the world." This quote very much relates with my own belief that the creativity and contribution of young generation in the field of academics, technology, as well as socio-cultural is a very important and certainly able to further develop not only one nation, but the world as a whole. Have fun and thank you all for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Dafri. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, our lecture today has commenced. I would now like to introduce and welcome our honorable moderator who will guide and lead today's discussion. We are immensely honored to welcome the Executive Director of the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, or ASEAN IPR, Ambassador I Gusti Agung Wasaka Puja. Previously, Ambassador Puja was the ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to the Kingdom of the Netherlands and permanent representative to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW, from February 2016 to June 2022. He was also the ASEAN SOM leader for Indonesia, or Director General for ASEAN Cooperation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also served as a high-level task force and also served as High-Level Task Force Indonesia on the ASEAN Community Post-2015 Vision. He also served as Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Indonesia to the Republic of Austria and Republic of Slovenia. Currently, the Permanent Representative to the United Nations and other international organizations in Vienna. In 2006 to 2009, he served as Ambassador or Deputy Permanent Representative of Indonesia to the United Nations, World Trade Organization, and other international organizations in Geneva. Ambassador Puja, I present you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ibu, for these introductions. Good afternoon, Pak Ahmad Dahlan, Mr. Joel Mark Barredo, Pak Dafri Agus Salims, all the panelists, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Happy 54th ASEAN Day. Today, indeed, is a moment of a reflection. In those 54 years, ASEAN and its member states have achieved remarkable progress in economic development, elevated hundreds of millions of their people out of abject poverty. ASEAN was created in the middle of mistrust of each member states before, but now ASEAN has further developed as a more integrated and rules-based organization from when it first started. It has managed to transform itself from trust deficit into reservoir of trust, confidence, and peace building. Indeed, peace and prosperity are intertwined. They are indivisible. In the past, ASEAN has been at the crossroads, even bumpy roads, of history several times, even now. As the Indonesian Foreign Minister said today during the celebrations, our road is not even easier. We have to find innovative way, but not as a pawn of this, quote, new Cold War. Decades of relative peace and stability in the region have coincided with an almost uninterrupted pursuit of economic development and prosperity. Peace means economic development. But where are we now? Despite all those progresses, a lot of questions remain. In particular, how to address the unprecedented new challenges and security threats. As our region now is at a critical juncture, the current evolving regional challenges and security threats are indeed interlinked, transnational, and divide national solutions which require a comprehensive approach. And how to maintain ASEAN as a net contributor to regional peace and stability. How to maintain the Asean Centrality, a place in the driving seat. Certainly, it is not a given. It is something that ASEAN must continue to earn, to nurture, and to strengthen. ASEAN must be shaping and molding the region's development by promoting the region's peace, prosperity, and security. ASEAN should continue to strengthen its capacity to transform challenges into opportunities, as optimistically expressed by the ASEAN Secretary General today during the ceremony, and adjust itself with the dynamics of a changing world, remain in the driving seat, and serves as a net contributor to peace and security regionally and globally, and eventually as a net contributor to global prosperity, and how youth play their role in this endeavor. So, dear friends, 54 years is not a number. This is not an event. This is a journey, long journey, a process to seize and to materialize ASEAN as a community of opportunities. It is up to us now. So raise our flags high, sky high, and embrace the pride. Dear colleague, friends, as in this public lecture today, we are discussing reflections on ASEAN then and now, we proudly present three distinguished panelists: Ibu Yuyun Wahyuningrum, Indonesia's representative at ICHR; Dr. Karine Kyo Franco, University of Southern Denmark; and Mr. Dio Hardiawan Tobing, Indonesia's delegation for 2021 ASEAN Youth Forum. So without further ado, I will introduce the first panelist for this event, Ibu Yuyun Wahyuningrum. She has more than 23 years experience working in human rights organization at the national, regional, and international level. She was the team leader of regional EU-ASEAN Dialogue Instruments on Human Rights Facility to support human rights work at the ICHR, also the ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children, the ASEAN Committee on Protection and Promotion of Migrant Workers, and the ASEAN Committee on Women. He wrote a lot of articles. In 2018, Ibu Yuyun was selected as one of Indonesian women experts at the 100 Women Wiki of the Women Unlimited, specializing on regionalism, human rights, and democracy in Southeast Asia. She is a PhD candidate at the International Institute of Social Studies, Erasmus University, Rotterdam. I met her in The Hague many times before. So without further ado, Ibu Yuyun, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Pak Puja Ambassador. Thank you very much for having me in this important event. I would like to recognize Bapak Wawan Masudi, Vice Dean from University of Gajah Mada, as well as Joel Mark Barredo from the SEPSI, and Dr. Dafri Agus Salim from ASEAN Studies Center. I have prepared my presentation to make my talk rather succinct and more effective. So I would like to share, okay, this one. All right, this one. So a reflection of ASEAN then and now. In this occasion, I would like to focus only on human rights as asked by the organizer. And I would like to start by looking at this, the purpose of this lecture. So I will not go anywhere. And Pak Puja already mentioned about some of the bumpy roads from the time that ASEAN was established in 1967 and how it has transformed until now. Pak Puja already mentioned some, but I would just only to add something that adding to what Pak Puja already mentioned earlier, that ASEAN has included human rights in the Charter and generate more human rights norms, policies, program, and practices. So in the topic of regionalism, usually this is the type of ASEAN is actually can be considered as the new type of regionalism, which not only look at security or politics or military cooperation, but only look at other issues like human rights, social, cultural, economic, and many other things. And by including human rights in the ASEAN regionalism, actually ASEAN with the all 10 countries make efforts to facilitate the creation of regional space for regional process among ASEAN member states to design and reorganize their interaction, relationship, and cooperation on human rights while considering their economic and political interests in ASEAN. So perhaps in number of literature, ASEAN was established for the purpose of political and security cooperation, as well as for economic cooperation. But by adding another topic, another issue, which is human rights, that create a space in which member states said because of this adding of the topic have to talk about regional cooperation on human rights. They have to talk about rearrange their relationship within human rights. By having this kind of topic or new topic in ASEAN, ASEAN created an institutions like ICHR, ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, ACWC, ASEAN Commission on the promotion protection of the right of women and children, and also develop some norms in relation to human rights at the regional level, such as ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, ASEAN Declaration for the protection of children in the context of migration, protection of children in the online, so many regulation and so many norms at the regional level now considering human rights into regional cooperation. By adding human rights in ASEAN, ASEAN also provide a platform in which human rights can be discussed at the regional level. So before the inclusion of human rights in ASEAN, there are a number of discussion on human rights, but at the national level or bilateral conversation or more than 3 countries conversation. But having it in the framework of ASEAN, so gradually there is a discourse, there are discourses, there are discussions, debate, and the platforms to facilitate that kind of conversation, putting human rights perspective into the regional cooperation, or vice versa, regional cooperation in human rights. And also by adding human rights into the ASEAN regionalism, ASEAN also provide a space or spaces for member states to engage to each other on human rights. Before the presence of human rights or before the inclusion of human rights, member states may talk about any other thing. Maybe the literatures inform you that there are a number of efforts to put human rights into the picture of ASEAN conversation by introducing comprehensive, flexible engagement, constructive engagement. But when ASEAN established ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights and also ACWC, there are a number of spaces in which countries, member states can discuss about human rights concern. And also encouraging practices on human rights at the regional level, such as developing plan of action. Now we can see more and more plan of action were drafted with the inclusion of human rights, with the participation of ICHR, and also working cross-pillar between and among communities such as political security community, economic community, and social cultural community, and also mainstreaming human rights. So it means that human rights is not the only responsibility of ICHR or political security, but also the responsibility of social cultural community and ASEAN community, economic community, because basically the characteristic of human rights is its implementation lies on the government. So political security community, economic community, social cultural community are actually consist of governments working based on certain mandates. Nevertheless, ICHR was created by member states. So member states still the one to dictate what ICHR can or cannot do based on their political economic influence interests. But as we can see in the last 12 years of ICHR, the interests of member states may change and evolve from time to time, depending on the context, depending on the political regime as well. So why states create a regional human rights mechanism? So I would like to have this a slide just to give us some kind of a basic understanding that there are a number of a different level of human rights mechanism. There are national human rights mechanisms. There are 5 in ASEAN countries. 5 countries establish national human institutions. There's regional human rights mechanisms such as ICHR and SCWC. In other regions, they also have African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, European Court on Human Rights. And also there are a number of human rights mechanisms at the international level. So the role of this different level of human rights is not to compete, but complement. The main responsibility of implementing human rights is at the national level. So the regional mechanism is to complement. Similarly, with the international mechanism of human rights, their role is to complement. Why then regional human rights mechanisms need to be created? It's regional identity. I think in number of literature, you also will find that many governments from ASEAN countries believe that the ASEAN identity should be included, or human rights should be included as part of the ASEAN identity. And it is hoped that the regional human rights mechanism will be able to better address, especially on regional issues. So for instance, national human rights institution can deal with number of domestic issues, but sometimes national human rights institution cannot go beyond their national jurisdiction on number of issues. So for instance, on migrant workers, the issue of migrant workers, trafficking in person, people smuggling, refugees. So these are the issues that regional human rights mechanism need to address in support of the effort of the national human rights mechanism and also national government to protect human rights. It also have a function to as an intermediary role between national and international system, assist member state to meet their commitment and develop regional human rights norms. So these are some of the roles of regional human rights mechanism as stated in number of literature proposed by scholars. I mentioned earlier that ICHR has been here for 12 years, but we can see the engagement between ASEAN and human rights has already started in 1967. I use Jack Donnelly's framework, but with little bit tweak, because he divided the phases of the development of international system into 4 phases. So I also use it as in 4 phases, borrowing terms from him in terms of denying phase, formation phase, institutionalization phase. But then on the 4th phase, I change it, not necessarily embracing human rights as a culture of human rights yet in ASEAN, but efforts to mainstream human rights. So in 1967 until 1997, that's the denying phase, confrontational engagement between ASEAN and human rights. As human rights has been seen rather as the tools for foreign powers to intervene to domestic issues, the domestic affairs of ASEAN member states. But gradually we see in 1991 to 1992, language of human rights enter ASEAN conversation, and then in some ASEAN countries, 6 ASEAN countries in that time participated in Vienna Conference of Human Rights, the World Conference of Human Rights in Vienna, and then gradually ASEAN come up with number of measures in relation to human rights cooperation, in ASEAN Vision, Hanoi Plan of Action. And then in the second phase, after gradually embracing human rights, ASEAN moved into formation phase by introducing number of ideas as mentioned in Vientiane Action Program, and then established the eminent person group to develop the ASEAN Charter, and then the team, a drafting team of ASEAN Charter was mentioned. ASEAN Charter was adopted in 2008. In 2009, 2019, that the process of institutionalization by creating a body, a mechanism, by introducing or drafting the declaration or norms of human rights. You can see the processes have been started from through the roadmap of ASEAN community, developing TUR, developing the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, enabling master plan. So the work of ICHR becoming larger and larger. And now 2020 until now, ICHR is focusing more on mainstreaming human rights, bringing together all the ASEAN sectoral bodies as well as ASEAN member state to talk about human rights, to take responsibility on human rights, or to include human rights into their mandates. So ICHR itself was established in 2009 by the Article 14 in the ASEAN Charter. It works based on TOR as well as the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, consists of 10 member states, so 10 representative. The purposes are, I think, 6 or 7, but I just put some here: to promote and protect human rights, to contribute to the realization of the purposes of ASEAN Charter, to promote human rights in the regional context. This is in line with the conceptual framework I mentioned earlier, and it to complement national and international efforts. So again, this is in line with what a scholar has been mentioned earlier, and to uphold the international human rights standards. ICHR report to ASEAN foreign ministers annually and meet twice in a year minimum. And ways of working of ICHR follows the ways of working of ASEAN. Consensus, consultation. It is also consultative and intergovernmental body. Yeah, 5 minutes more. So these are the function of the ICHR. There are 14 mandates that I put together into 6. You can read later on. And some the progresses. So this is the most interesting presentation in my presentation, I think. So in terms of as ICHR has been criticized of being a lack of protection. So gradually, number of countries, especially Indonesia, has been put a lot of investment, a lot of efforts, measures to include protection in ICHR. Now we have communication mechanism, even though it is not complete. It is still 3-step communication. So as the illustration on the right side put the procedures of how communication or complaint can be done. We also implement Article 4.10 on to obtain information from member state without being accused of violating the non-interference principle. Now, in our agenda item, we have agenda item 4 to receive updates from ASEAN members, from ICHR representative on recent development in ASEAN, where we can talk about number of issues. Indonesia has been presenting a number of issues in relation to Myanmar, as well as in Indonesia, also refugees in Thailand and Malaysia. And in our 5-year work plan 2021-2025, we also included number of protection mandates to be implemented. So we would like to make sure that until 2025, we continue working on protection. So for instance, we mentioned about the right to remedies there, complaint mechanism, grievance mechanism. Grievance mechanism and complaint mechanism is almost similar, but we are trying to explore more possible type of grievance mechanisms, referral system for victims, a human rights index. So human rights index is a way of saying human rights monitoring. The word monitoring still something that taboo in ASEAN, so we use index and it was accepted. And country visit in relation to human rights. So these are some of the human rights protection that included in our 5-year work plan. Another progress is that engagement. Now we engage with more and more governments and civil society and national human institutions. So in the last 11 years, ICHR has refused to engage with national human institutions. Into 2020, we engage with them, and we are going to have again. We have it again in November in our meeting in the next meeting. In terms of responses, ICHR now gradually able to respond situation. So for instance, on COVID-19, Myanmar political crisis, and other human rights issues through different kind of ways. As ICHR, as a regional organization, as well as some representative or individual representative can release their own press statement if they wish. Um, uh, uh, we have been addressing the issue of the political crisis in Myanmar in number of press releases so far. The TOR review, we supposed to review the TOR in 2014, but it was not done. The one that should review the TOR is actually foreign ministers, but now we table again, and the senior official meeting already established POE or panel of experts, and we just received the name from Philippines, adding to the nomination from Indonesia, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Thailand to be the panel of experts. In terms of what is this? In terms of regional strategies, this is I need to mention this because this is one of the Pak Puja's legacy, human rights dialogue. Pak Puja Indonesian government introduced the human rights dialogue in 2013. This is like a mini UPR. Now this year we are going to organize another one, but this is not the Indonesian initiative anymore. This is ASEAN or ICHR initiative. Of course, the proponent of the project is Indonesia, but the ownership of this process of mini UPR belong to ICHR now. It's regional initiative. We are going to do it annually because we already put it in the 5-year work plan. So actually a number of things here are the legacies of Indonesia's contribution to the development of ICHR and also human rights in ASEAN in general. In terms of strategies, and we come up with we part of the work plan, also sectoral bodies part of our work plan. So these are some of the work plan that we already adopted so far, from trafficking, violent extremism, and migrant workers, and also comprehensive recovery framework. So this is my last slide. So ASEAN now, the inclusion, I mentioned earlier as my argument that the inclusion of human rights in ASEAN Charter has generated more norms, policies, program, discourses, debates, and practices, which are important to create a human rights culture in ASEAN. But to what extent ASEAN has integrated human rights culture in its work, not yet full, but we are going toward that direction. I end my presentation there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu Yuyun, for the very inspiring, indeed, presentation, and gave me a lot of recollection of my past experience during the 25 years of involving in the human rights issues, including in the debate of establishment of human rights mechanism in ASEAN. It's very rich information. Ibu Yuyun covers a lot of aspects of the human rights development, including the evolution and progress of human rights mechanism and architecture, and how human rights has been transformed actually to the new type of regionalism in our regions, and also how to maintain human rights issues in the 3 pillars of ASEAN community. And of course, the issue of promotion and protection, which one first, is always a very debatable. Even until now, it's not concluded yet. And on how to promote the human rights dialogue is also very, very progressive steps within the realm of the human rights issues in our regions. And also the most important is how human rights has been attributed to the development of democracy in our region. This is also very, very important. And last but not least, of course, Ibu Yuyun provided a lot of legacies of Indonesia in the human rights development. I think it's from the very beginning, we learned a lot of efforts of the regions and Indonesia in particular against all the odds and the taboos of human rights in ASEAN. Thank you so much, Ibu Yuyun, for the very inspiring presentations. Now we have our second panelist, Dr. Karine Kyo Franco. She is postdoctoral fellow at the School of Political Science and Public Administration, University of Southern Denmark. Previously, she was head tutor of political science and an early career researcher at the University of Melbourne. She holds a PhD degree in international relations from the University of Melbourne. Dr. Karine also teach experience through tutoring, leading seminars, and lecturing at the University of Melbourne and Fudan University. She has taught various subjects, mainly in the areas of international relations, transnational crimes, Asian studies, and research methodologies. She is the author of the book promoting UN-ASEAN coordinations, policy transfer, and regional cooperations against human trafficking in Southeast Asia, to be published by Edward Elger. A very good morning, Dr. Karine, and thank you for this opportunity. I think it's still too early in Denmark right now. It's good that it's the summertime, so at least you see the sun already raised in Denmark. So without ado, I give you the floor now for 20 minutes. Over to you, Dr. Karine.
Thank you, Ambassador Christie, for the kind introduction. So I also prepared some slides. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you guys see my screen okay? All right. All right. So hi, everyone. I'm delighted and honored to be invited to speak to you on a rather broad theme, ASEAN then and now. So I have decided to focus on Asean Centrality, so which can be understood as ASEAN lying or returning at the core of regional architecture in Asia-Pacific or in Indo-Pacific. So Asean Centrality is related to a number of similar concepts. So you can understand it as ASEAN being the leader, the architect, the fulcrum, the institutional hub, or the driver of institutional building in Asia-Pacific or in Indo-Pacific. So me, like as an ASEAN researcher, that I have been mainly focusing on ASEAN Centrality in the past 6 years. So what attracted me, a Chinese, to ASEAN studies is really because of ASEAN Centrality. So why was your age? So I'm assuming that we have many students here, that you probably undergraduate master students, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, so why was your age that I was involved in quite some initiatives that discussing the regional cooperation in Northeast Asia. So one of the examples is the, I think called ASEAN, the Asia Futures Leaders Forum. I'm not sure if that initiative is still active. So back then, that initiative involves mainly China, Japan, I think South Korea, and Singapore. So students from top universities of these countries were discussing the possibility of establishing a cooperation mechanism in Northeast Asia. So from those discussions that I realized that the cooperation among China, South Korea, and Japan is not possible without a key actor. So that is ASEAN. So I find it quite fascinating because if you look at it, cooperation in other regions, including the Europe, and also North America. And so it's usually led by a number of or one superpowers. But in Asia, what we see is actually a group of smaller countries that are leading the process. So just today that I would like to focus on this interesting phenomenon, Asean Centrality, and also maybe starting by introducing its changes over time and the reason for the establishment of Asean Centrality. And also I will also be introducing the key challenges to Asean Centrality, especially in the past decade. And I will conclude my presentation by on the way forward and also the role of ASEAN youth. All right, okay, so the figure you are seeing now is a simplified representation of ASEAN-centered arrangements. So as you can see that they include ARF, that's ASEAN Regional Forum, which was established in 1994. So mainly for now, like security focused. And then the next one would be ASEAN +3, so which was established in 1997. So that was like established right after the Asian financial crisis, includes mainly ASEAN +3. And then the most important, probably still quite active one would be EAS, East Asian Summit. So it was originally created in 2005 in the format of ASEAN +6. And it was expanded in 2011 to include Russia and the United States. And then we also have this ADMM Plus, ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting. So this is a premier platform where the defense ministers of the Asia Pacific countries meet to discuss security as well as non-traditional security issues. I also added a RCEP here. So that's a regional comprehensive economic partnership. So it's basically a trade deal. So that was launched in 2020. Although I count it as ASEAN-centered regional initiative, but I have to point out that so the leadership of ASEAN within this initiative is rather symbolic rather than substantial. So this is the conclusion of many observers of ASEAN. So to a certain degree that I agree with them as well. So as you can see from this introduction that the ASEAN Centrality was mainly established between mid of the 1990s and 2010, 2011. So before 1990s, so ASEAN was mainly focusing inward. So until 1990s, especially after the Asian financial crisis, that the ASEAN countries realized that it's important to actually expand its reach. So it started to replicate its models in a wider regional scope, especially by spreading the ASEAN Way. So ASEAN Way is categorized by its focus on non-interference, consensus-based decision-making, non-confrontational negotiations, minimalist institutionalization, and so on. And then you can see that ARF, ERS, and also then basically all the ASEAN-centered mechanisms share these kind of characteristics. However, as I mentioned before, that it seemed like from 2010, 2011, that we see a diminished role of ASEAN. So I'm going to talk about this like challenges to ASEAN centrality later on, but for now that I want to focus on how to understand ASEAN centrality or what has led to the central role of ASEAN. Like there is a sizable body of literature on this topic. So I divided them mainly into 4 categories. So you can see the first one that seeing ASEAN's centrality as a like result of pure geopolitical luck. So because ASEAN is situated in a central location between 2 oceans, the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, and also between 3 sub-regions, Northeast Asia, South Asia, as well as Oceania. So it also can act as a buffer between rival powers, so between China, the US, Japan, India, Russia. and so on. Yeah, so the second, I think, strength is kind of related to the first approach that I see that ASEAN centrality as a result of a temporary arrangement between major powers. So because of ASEAN's non-threatening stance, or its perceived benignity, so it's actually able to drive the process, which for for major powers would be seen as a acceptable and a convenient way to actually promote a cooperation, while at the same time without raising suspicions of their nationalist governments and peoples. So this is the second strength. While the third approach, the socialization approach, that I would say like place more agency on ASEAN actors. So for example, scholars like Alice Ba, Meli Calabora, Anthony, Sinsi Tang, and so on. So they believe that ASEAN countries, even though they're probably constrained in military and economic power, they are able to socialize major powers in an open-ended and incremental relation-building processes. And also some take a social network view, saying that ASEAN is able to drive the agenda setting and also drive the device, the institutional structure, therefore place itself in the center of regional structure. I think the fourth approach is my own approach. So my approach builds on socialization, but I take a step further by arguing that so ASEAN is not only able to integrate major powers in the regional building processes, but also able to transform non-ASEAN stakeholders in conforming to ASEAN values and interests. So I published my findings on Aseanization in a recent paper in International Relations of Asia Pacific. Just so I look at the case of the AFCC, so that is ASEAN multi-sectoral framework on climate change and food security. So my conclusion is that the ASEAN's institutional setting is actually conducive to Aseanization or the transformation of non-ASEAN actors. So as you can see from this institutional structure, also you may already know that the ASEAN decision-making involves multiple rounds of consensus-based negotiations at working group level, at senior officials level, at minister level, and all the way to head state level. So all this consensus-based decision-making would actually conducive to producing compromise and also agreements among ASEAN member states, as well as between ASEAN countries and non-ASEAN countries or other types of actors. So from a comparison of agriculture sector and also forest sector under this AFCC framework, I found that the non-ASEAN actors have gone through different levels of Aseanization depending on the power asymmetry between them and ASEAN countries. So what I observed as in the agricultural sector that because of the relatively lower level of ASEAN power asymmetry of non-ASEAN actors in vis-a-vis ASEAN countries, I see a deeper level of Aseanization. So in that, so they have internalized ASEAN countries' preferences and follow a climate change governance approach that's favored by ASEAN countries, while forest sector that the non-ASEAN actors were in a more privileged position to actually impose some new conditions and also legitimacy measures. For the sake of time, I'm not really going to detail to discuss this case. But if you're interested in climate change, interested in ASEAN's institutional setting, I'm just happy to discuss with you during probably the Q&A session. All right, so the next one that, as I mentioned before, that so from 2010 to 2011, we seem to see the marginalization of ASEAN in Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific. So the timing corresponds to the rising rivalry between major powers, especially between the United States and China. So in 2009, the Obama administration announced that the US is returning to Asia or rebalancing pivot to Asia. And also the Trump administration announced the policy of free and open Indo-Pacific. And also from 2017, a quadrilateral security dialogue, or more famously known as Quad, was revived. So at the same time that you see China was actually building its presence within the region, especially through the launch of Belt and Road Initiative. That was in 2013. And then so China was also intended to build a China-centered regional order. Apart from China and the US, you see also India, Japan, Australia, and also South Korea. They're all trying to project influence within the region. So to a certain extent that this kind of power dynamics and also the building of rival initiatives, especially Quad and BRI, have like undermined the central role of ASEAN. Also, at the same time that ASEAN is facing some persistent challenges, so including the lack of cohesion among ASEAN states. So ASEAN is famous for its diversity. So its member states that do not share the same level of development, the national interest, cultural, language, and so on. So this has prevented further institutionalization of ASEAN. And also that we are observing some further division among ASEAN member states. We see that some members choose to be strategically closer to China, and some to be closer to the United States, while of course some countries are claiming to be neutral at the same time. And also at the same time that ASEAN is constrained by its resources and the material power. So I have no doubt that the region has a bright future, and all the regional countries are developing really, really fast. And ASEAN is very possible becoming the next economic powerhouse of the world. But for now, that is just the regional countries still limited in economic or military power. And also, especially militarily, many of the regional countries rely on major powers for security. So in this context, then what is going to happen to ASEAN centrality? So my answer is that so these new dynamics in no way will make ASEAN-centered arrangements irrelevant. So quite on the contrary, I believe that is the ASEAN-based agreements or groupings will assume greater importance in a context like this. So because ASEAN-centered mechanisms are only platforms that actually involve both US and China. If you look at the BII, Belt and Road Initiative, and also US, the headed Quad. So even though they claim to be inclusive in design, but because of a rivalry between the United States and China, they turn into exclusive platforms. So ASEAN-centered mechanisms are only platforms that can bring these two powers together. So the challenge for ASEAN leaders, I think, is to how to maintain ASEAN as a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. I think that's the goal of ASEAN leaders since the 1970s. Then it's still a persistent challenge for ASEAN leaders. Yeah, 5 minutes. I should be able to finish soon. Yeah. So and then to deal with the challenges, to not taking side and protect the regions from big power competition, and at the same time that maintain unity. And then how to become more proactive in organizing regional dialogues to reduce misunderstandings, disagreements, conflicts between member states, as well as between members and major powers. So the most important thing, I think, is to empower the youth. So empower you guys. So I have checked the statistics that the population of ASEAN youth that's aged between 15 and 34 years old is 213.2 million. So that's more than 1/3 of total population of ASEAN. I also saw different figures that the population younger than 30 accounted for more than half of the ASEAN population. So if you put this figure in perspective, you see only 1/4 of population and 1/5 population in the United States are youth. So in ASEAN, I have to say that the young people are very much the agent of change. So I want to end my conversation with some words to the young people. First of all, I want encourage you guys to have faith in multilateralism, especially have faith in ASEAN institutions. You guys are growing up in an age of rising nationalism, populism, and also protectionism. The pandemics in the last 2 years, actually, we see that the trend is actually getting worse. So therefore, that I want to remind you to actually be open to other cultures. So learn the history, cultural values of the other countries. So whether through social media, TV, newspapers, exchange programs, so that just enjoy the assets that can be provided by all cultures. And also at the same time that if you guys aim to become diplomats and work for international organizations or international companies, that it's important for you guys to build cross-cultural communication skills. You will find these skills come in handy when you start working in future. And also, if you have opportunities, participate in meaningful international dialogues and activities that are available to young people. So when I was your age, that I involved in some of those initiatives, I found that it was really helpful. So I made some friends that are still have contact with until now, and also that really has changed my worldview. So I also encourage you guys to get involved in that as well. Yeah, so that's all for me for now, and then I'm happy to address any of the questions you may have during the Q&A section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karine, for your very comprehensive presentations. I feel like sitting in a class on ASEAN matters. You recall me of a book wrote by Kishore Mahbubani, Can ASEAN Think? It's probably this is a time whether we should question this book. Dr. Karine has been touching upon in her presentations a lot of issues, especially on the ASEAN centrality and how ASEAN should maintain its in the driving seat in this current great power rivalries recently, and of course the key challenges on the ASEAN centrality as presented by Dr. Karine, especially because of the great power rivalry, lack of cohesion in ASEAN, and also limited resources including also in the limited military powers. So I think this is also reminding me with what the Foreign Minister of Indonesia this morning during the ASEAN ceremony. She underlined that ASEAN members should not be a pawn of a new Cold War. So I think this is a great reminder for all of us. And of course, very interesting issues on the Aseanizations, including also the institutional settings, because ASEAN now has been it's a norm-based institutions. And the way forward, of course, very, very interesting also, and how ASEAN should maintain the sovereign and also maintain the unity in diversity. Of course, this is a good tips for the youth in particular as an agent of change, which give the power to the future, especially to enhance the ASEAN centrality. Thank you so much, Dr. Karine, for the presentations. Now, I would like to give the floor to the third panelist, Mr. Dio Herdiawan Tobing. Mr. Tobing is a non-resident fellow with the ASEAN Studies Center of the University of Gadjah Mada and a member of the Indonesian delegate to the ASEAN Youth Forum 2021. and I believe he is still very young. He is the founder of Policy Lab Indonesia. He was also previously a senior policy advisor to the Dutch Embassy in Jakarta, research assistant at the KITLV Royal Netherlands Institute for Southeast Asia and the Caribbean, and a full-time fellow member of the Asean Studies Center at the Gajah Mada University. And I'm quite amazed actually, so many alumni from the Netherlands this afternoon. Mr. Tobing received his Master in Public International Law from Leiden University. And of course, he is now with us, and hopefully his presentation will touch upon now the role of the youth in particular. So, Pak Dio, over to you.
Thank you so much. Terima kasih Pak Puja for a very nice introduction this afternoon. Hello everybody. Hello Pak Dafri. Hello Mbak Yuyun. Hello Dr. Karine. And fellow members, fellow students of AYIP edition 2021. I really want to, thinking of like having the wisdom of sharing, but as Pak Puja rightly said that I'm still young. I'm still exploring my wisdom. Dr. Karine was able to say, when I was your age, I did this, I did that. I hope that the point of view that I'm trying to share with you this afternoon would encourage you as youth, as students, perhaps undergraduate students or postgraduate students in reflecting how youth and ASEAN walk hand in hand towards the building of ASEAN community. I also prepared some slides to be shared this afternoon. I hope this could be seen by all of you. Yeah. While Mbak Yuyun and also Dr. Karine has already mentioned and explored about the historical view of ASEAN comprehensively on human rights issues, on peace, on the great power rivalries, I'd like to rather reflect, as Pak Puja rightly say, this is the time of reflection for all of us, especially with COVID-19 pandemic hitting all the ASEAN member states without any exceptions. And therefore, I think it would be nice to as youth to also look at how our fellow students in other countries have been impacted also by the pandemic, and how could we do better as youth, as ASEAN as an organization, but also as civil society members of the regional mechanism. Okay, so the outline of today, sharing session, I would call it this way, is that I'd like to try to touch upon the issues that youth are impacted by COVID-19, the overview of youth in ASEAN, and some of regional commitments that have already been adopted and how the way forward should look like. Okay, so how many of you are in this room? I think around 60. And 60 is still a very small number than the total number of youth in ASEAN. Currently, there are 213 million young people in ASEAN. And the forecast in 2038, there are perhaps more than 20 million, while the total of the population in ASEAN itself is 661 million inhabitants. Youth is already 1/3 of the total population. And of course, while we are grateful here that we can join the session, we can have webinars, there are many youths, I would call them, perhaps also under the privilege, that could not have the opportunity, same as us, in exploring ways how could we strengthen the regional building, the community building in ASEAN. And just to move forward, since the pandemic hit, we see the increasing number of youth unemployment in ASEAN. This is the graph we see in Brunei Darussalam, the unemployment rate is around 30%. In Cambodia, it's 1.1%. In Indonesia, it's 60.15%, and so on and so forth. As a combination of all, which means that almost 10% of the 213 million youth in ASEAN are unemployed. That is a very, very huge number, especially as we discussed today on how youth are playing a crucial role in this community building, how the leadership of ASEAN is also determined by youth today in these days. By the way, sorry of the number 9 right here, it doesn't mean anything. And that means also from this number that I extracted from the initiative of the ASEAN Foundation, university graduates in ASEAN, as the survey collected, 1 out of 10 who are graduating from university, it's me, it's you, it's everyone who's joining this afternoon, 1 of us could potentially be unemployed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then you see also, sorry, this is going back. You see also that in Indonesia alone, right now, the recent data has suggested that it has reached 20% in depth of the pandemic, while the rest of the countries remains under 15%. This is important to note. And other than that, we see also education. As the pandemic hit, schools are closed, not only in my country, but also in your country, perhaps in Thailand, in Myanmar, the Philippines, who have already seen full school closures exceeding 200 days. And in the Philippines alone, K-12, which is the education provided since the age of 6 to the age of 17, the 12 years of education, the number of students dropped by 2.6 million, which is 10% compared to the previous years. You know, there are many issues why this is being done so. It could be one, that they are unable to attend school because of the physical distancing issue, for instance. But also, if in the case that they are provided online classes, how many of them they don't have access to the digital environment, for instance. And some of them also provided that while they have the digital environment, while they have their iPad with them, while they have their mobile phones with them, internet access, data, for instance, remains also an exclusive thing that could be obtained in ASEAN states, in which that not all of us have this Wi-Fi at home. Some of us rely on data that is, we attend school every day, that would take, I don't know, 7 hours, 8 hours to attend lectures. But also not only that, not only the data, but also the applications that they're downloading. How many of students in ASEAN, they're still relying, for instance, with smartphones, but early editions of smartphones in which that it remains difficult and for them to stick in their phones to follow the lectures or to follow the classes. And this is also pretty important to look at from the angle that not all of them, for instance, are well equipped with the capacity to do so. How many youth in ASEAN are also disabled, in need of assistance, for instance, in helping them to access this? So I presented here in the slides that gender matters, equality matters, perspective of social inclusion matters, that many students denied a quality education because of the infrastructure, the digital devices, the learning resources. How about the books, for instance? And how about the home environment? I'm lucky here that I could have my own room, for instance, to access educational learning. But how many of them are residing in one small house, and within their room, they share their room with their parents, with their brothers, with their sisters, that they're unable to concentrate? These are issues that we don't see in the case that they are attending schools presently, physically at school. And children and youth with disabilities need and more attention for learning supports and aids, for somebody to help them. And especially girls as well, they're considered vulnerable because the community expectations to engage household chores and babysitting, for instance, to engage with things that helping their mother, for instance, cooking, other things that is still socially construed or constructed in ASEAN member states as the role of women, which needs also to be, corrected somehow. Next. So I'd like just to see you the graph of the school closure last year. So this does not include this year. Even last year, Indonesia, school have started to slowly closing since February. So in Indonesia, the first cases identified was officially on the 3rd of March, but some measures has already been taken to close the schools. And in the red, closing of all levels, which means we divided by elementary schools, middle schools, and also senior high schools. And this has continued this year as we know and we learned that the Delta variant is highly contagious, and they are now closing even more. And the plan has always been extended for school reopenings. Another problems related to the education, as already been mentioned, is that it's not only the schooling system, it's the infrastructure, but also teaching materials and lack of support to vulnerable students. One key issues that we need to address as well is that when we look at the grading system in ASEAN member states, how do we then take note of examinations? Of course, students is very much familiar with doing exams, mid-exam, final exams. But this, in my cases, for instance, if we attend school and having exam present right away, we have, for instance, the pressure of doing the exams. But when we do it at home, we don't have this anymore. We don't have the pressure. We can somehow, cheat. If we want to cheat, we can access of digital and connect to the internet environments. And these issues needs to be addressed as well. And to what extent in the curriculum, the emergency curriculum now that we are experiencing in ASEAN would continue this way and in need of adjustment. It is, of course, in need of adjustment if the pandemic continues. And also the industry changes with the 4IR addressed by ASEAN member states, also under the Brunei Darussalam chairmanship. This is an emerging industry that is, we need to rely on in the next few decades, for instance. To what extent that our current workforce and youth was enabled, for instance, to adapt to and do not have the similar digital literacy capacity, could then participate in the industry, could participate and get job in this industry. Right. But how can we then, play roles in I'm going to return to this, but this is the good news. How do we see this? Apparently, in the past year, as we see, there's also a good news in the disaster that we're experiencing together. While the pandemic is a true test for all youth on resilience, on adaptability, there are significant challenges with working and studying remotely, of course, with the social distancing. The adoption rate to digital literacy, learning new skills, thinking creatively, developing new business models for those youth who are interested to building up startups, for instance, has increased in the past years. This is a massive increase than the years before. The study by the World Economic Forum in 2020 suggested that 87% of youth has already increased the usage of digital tools during the pandemic. Some youth, perhaps, they're not familiar of shopping online. They have been asked by their parents, for instance, to go to the market to buy groceries, but this is no longer exists in some area in which that cases of COVID-19 surge, and they're asked by the parents to do groceries as well, and they're now accessing digital modes. This is important to also understand that 80% confirmed looking at themselves that they have more resilience and they're prepared for future pandemics. Not sure how prepared they are, the necessity of an individual to understand the current environment. We are lucky as youth. We're not old people. Like my parents, for instance, were already around 60s. Who was not using their mobile phones often, and very much difficult when the pandemic hit. Try to adapt with this current environment of shopping online. They said, I remember they said, if we are to buy groceries online, well, this is not exciting anymore. I cannot choose the fruits. I cannot choose the meat that we are selecting. Very household matters. But for us, this is already, the adaptability as youth to adapt in the current environment is helping us much better to adapt in this pandemic. And also 38%, guys, have been able to think creatively to address the challenges that we face during the pandemic. But apart from that, how can we then, as youth in this environment, adapt and support the ASEAN community building? As Pak Puja already mentioned, that youth are the leaders of tomorrow, ASEAN leaders of tomorrow. Youth today and our participation in education, in mobility through education, we are the soft power that strengthens the peace that is already exists in ASEAN. Our job was not as difficult as our founding fathers were. That ASEAN existed in the ecosystem. There was peace was not created yet, and we strive. Our founding fathers strive on how to build an ASEAN during the 1960s environment of Cold War, for instance. Now we don't have that anymore. We can connect easily through the internet. I'm currently participating in the ASEAN Youth Forum when we can easily meet online as well. Also, like in this forum, we could invest in peace through mobility, through student exchanges. There are more and more of scholarships provided for intra-ASEAN students' mobility. So that, for instance, for Indonesians to study in Brunei, for Indonesians to study in Thailand, though these days these are not as exciting as it was before. These are things that we need to keep investing on to share the identity of ASEAN that perhaps not all of us previously experience or understand already. So through education, through training, healthcare for those youth who are working already in the healthcare sector is very much appreciated for all of you who is helping us in eradicating this pandemic. Those who are creating startups, creating jobs more in addressing youth employment. And there are many also volunteering work that is provided, for instance, by the ASEAN Foundation, in which that we can create a project in other countries to help reduce the social issues of youth in other countries in ASEAN. So these are things that I'd like to share, but also learning in the past years about how things were and how we could adapt. Still, there are many problems that exist in youth. The motivation, perhaps, in those who do not have the same access as we do, is very much lacking behind. Also, the study of the World Economic Forum suggested that the percentage of using digital tools more than the first time before COVID has already increased. This is 50% increasing. There are many still without access. There are many who do not have online education, cannot access e-commerce buying because in Indonesia alone, in remote areas, e-commerce is not covered, for instance, through the internet. And streaming, educational learning, these are things that those who are privileged should be able to extend the opportunities to those who are underprivileged. In the region, we have seen already commitments of our leaders on how we potentially utilize the role of youth in community building. The ASEAN Institute of Peace and Reconciliation in 2018 adopted the Youth Declaration on Peace and Tolerance, in which that we are recognized as youth as an agent of peace, as an agent of tolerance. We are those who are able to extend to understand and to focus more on the positive sides of differences in ASEAN rather than the negative sides. We also saw last year with all things in the pandemic attacking the existence of youth in ASEAN. We see youth ministers adopted the ASEAN Youth Ministers statement on youth cooperation for a cohesive and responsive ASEAN community. These adoptions is attached to the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, in which that they're encouraging we as youth could potentially be potentials for them in extending peace in the region as well, and adaptability of the region in COVID-19. Today, perhaps yesterday, actually, on the 6th, at the ASEAN Regional Forum, there was also a recent adoption on the joint statement on promotion of youth, peace, and security agenda. This is at the recent leaders meeting, and another recognition for, yes, Pak Pujit, another recognition of the importance and role of youth in ASEAN. I think with that in mind, we look forward as youth, though we are still in the advocacy processes, for instance, through the ASEAN Youth Organization, ASEAN Youth Forum, and other mechanisms that is performed by the NGOs. We look forward to more involvement of youth in regional policy-making processes. Last year at an ASEAN meeting, ASEAN Youth event at the Secretariat, an endorsement has already been made by the DSG Kongtuak on socio-cultural community, in which that he said that to make sure that the young people have the experience in area of policy making, we need more platforms in ASEAN that is endorsed, that is enabling our environment for us to exchange views and be part of the ASEAN's programs. In this way, young people can develop better an understanding of policy processes and raise their concerns and solutions. As Bayu Yin is also here, perhaps youth perspective on, we see as youth also, there are initiatives created by the IHR, Regional Youth Debate on Human Rights, for instance. These are things that we as youth would like to see also more and more to be expanded, and also to consult as youth in the processes of the ASEAN sector, other sectoral bodies. I think these are insights that I could possibly share with you today. As time constraints, I look forward to discuss with you in the discussion session, and over to you, Pak Jet.
Thank you, Pak Dio, for your very inspiring presentations. Indeed, this is not inspiring, but also very encouraging, especially for the youth to keep up their spirits, especially during this pandemic, unfortunate pandemic situations. Of course, Pak Dio Tobing cover up a lot of issues, especially on the overview, the youth, and especially gave a lot of presentations on the impact of the COVID-19 towards the youth, especially in ASEAN, and how the regional commitment in these respects. Of course, youth play in ASEAN community building as a soft power. And Mr. Tobing also overview and how youth should invest in peace and mobility, and also on the shared identity. This is very important investment indeed, especially how you invest in your own field, as emphasized by Pak Dio. And especially he emphasized on commitment of the youth, and especially on promoting peace in the regions, and of course, and how also give the opportunity to the youth to be involved in the policy making process. So thanks a lot, Pak Dio Tobing, for your very encouraging presentations. Dear friends, colleagues, now we are now at the Q&A pace. We have about 35 minutes for this Q&A. We are having so many very, very interesting questions already written on the chats. I will not probably be able to read them one by one because there's so many questions, like an not never-ending questions posed by you. So I just would like to cluster all those questions to every panelist because if I read it one by one, the time probably will not available for the panelists to write all and to respond all those questions. So first, there are so many questions addressed to Ibu Yuyun. So I will make a cluster of questions and then you may respond later on, and I will do the same thing also to each of panelists. First, I just choose and pick up some very relevant, good questions indeed, especially first from Gerald John Guillermo from the Philippines. His question is, do you think the ASEAN Regional Framework on Human Rights is enough to address current human rights issues in member states of ASEAN? And especially in democratic movements in Thailand, Myanmar, Philippines, among others. Second questions from Sophie from the Philippines, also to Bu Yuyun. Do you think that the regional policy of the ASEAN in terms of protecting the rights of migrant workers enough? How can the ASEAN improve the securitizations of migrant work in sending countries like the Philippines and Indonesia? The third question is from Naufal from Indonesia. He asks, I want to ask how effective is the role of NGOs on enforcing, promoting, or even mainstreaming the human rights issues in the region? The fourth question from Lem, I don't know whether it's a real name or not, a Lem, like the silence of the lamb. Also to Bu Yuyun, as mentioned by speaker and stated in the slides, it was known that it will be helping human rights on the COVID-19. Probably Pak Dio Tobing also can jump on this also later on. May I know how will ASEAN help human rights in the context of COVID-19 situation, especially right now? Several major ASEAN countries are facing difficulties. Wow, it's a lot of admire for Ibu Yuyun actually. So another questions, the fifth questions. What are the responses of the AICHR to address the human rights violations in the Philippines, particularly the war on drugs? Ooh, so it's a tough questions. And from Dara, from Indonesia, also to Ibu Yuyun, she said, I am mostly intrigued by the mainstreaming human rights issues. However, ASEAN is known for the ASEAN way, in which respecting member states' sovereignty is taking place. Yet I was wondering if the non-interference principles of ASEAN has become a restraint to address more significant human rights issues in a moment of ASEAN member states, you know, which the country is been referred to? If it doesn't, how does the boundary is set to prevent the undermining of a state's sovereignty? So, another question, the sixth question from Ponesavan Kyo Filai. What do we need to do for everybody in ASEAN can access the state vaccine for their basic human rights? So that's for a lot of questions for Ibu Yuyun. You may respond the whole questions for 10 or 15 minutes. Please, Ibu Yuyun, over to you.
Thank you, Pak Puja. Thank you very much for the questions. Very, very critical questions. I'm very, very happy to have these questions. First, I would like to address the classic question on ASEAN ways and human rights in relation to non-interference principle. So I believe, as a student of international relations, I believe that non-interference principle is the principle of international relation as well as international law, but it can be breached with certain conditions. For instance, number one, there should be an agreement among member states participating in the forum or member state of the institution. Secondly, there is a great space to talk about human rights issues. This is something that we can see in the UN. So the non-interference principle is actually mentioned in the Article 2 of the Asean Charter. There is a UN declaration on non-interference principle. So non-interference principle is not unique to ASEAN. It's all it is a principle. It's a doctrine of international law and international relations. But in certain situation, based on the agreement, we can talk about domestic issues, human rights domestic issues of other countries without being accused of breaching the human rights domestic issues. So this is something that ICHR has been practicing at least in this year. First, we agreed among ourselves how to discuss this in our official meeting. And that is why I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have now agenda item 4. Agenda item 4, so when you have a meeting, you have agenda item 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is usually in the organizational meeting. Usually agenda item 1 is the adoption of the agenda. Agenda item 2, the adoption of program. Agenda item 3 is about approval or adoption of summary report. Agenda item 4 is something else. But in ICHR now, agenda item 4 relate to the update of the ASEAN ICHR representative on recent development of human rights. So so first we have an agreement among ourselves, among 10 countries, to discuss about human rights issues on a voluntary basis as a modality. Second, we have allocated a space. We don't talk about other issues, like we don't talk about Myanmar issues in other agenda. We talk only in the agenda item 4. Before last meeting in July, in April, we call it as agenda item 15 because the order is 15, just right before the other matters. In agenda item 15, I remember NGOs coming to our meeting, and they come across on the issue of Myanmar, but then all representatives did not respond to that question because we had a specific space when we can express our concerns in relation to the political crisis in Myanmar. So no one can impose any or can question our intervention by saying that, oh, Indonesia breaching the non-interference principle of other countries. No, because we already agreed. So as long as these two requirements are achieved, the agreement among the players, the key actors in that forum, and then second, there is a space. So we don't spill over to other issues. So before this space, it has been quite difficult to table issues. Every time we want to table number of issues in relating to human rights, we always block with different reason. One of them is about non-interference principle, but now we do not have that kind of accusation anymore. So the way we approach as Indonesia is that this principle is there and remain to be there. So we have to deal with it. We work around it, not to remove it, because removing it is something very difficult, because it is something that we already agreed as the international community. So mainstreaming human rights has nothing. Mainstreaming human rights in the sense that we ask governments to include human rights. So we have a number of activities bringing ASEAN member states to come together and provide the platform in which member states can learn to each other on how to mainstream human rights. For instance, we organized a number of events. One of them was about right to development. We invited the National Agency for Planning. So member states learn from each other on how to include human rights into the planning. So they don't have to wait until the current planning finishes. They can include that based on learning. So that actually can at the national level. At the regional level, the way we do it is we participate in the drafting, the development of a regional plan of action. So for instance, the SOMTC, Senior Official Meeting on Transnational Organized Crime, developed the work plan in relation to CVE, counter-violent extremism. We participated and we offer the human rights approach. So we look at from one until the end, how to include human rights in it. And also we contribute what human rights can do, what Human Rights Commission can do in relation to the implementation of plan of action, because Indonesia believes that the approach to violent extremism, terrorism need to be humane. That's our national policies, and we would like to have it this kind of approach, a human rights-based approach to violent extremism, also appear at the regional level. So that's mainstreaming, and what ICHR has been what ICHR response on the war on drugs. So far, we have not been able to address the issue on war on drugs in the Philippines, but we address a number of issues in relation to the issue of Rohingya, the issue of political crisis in Myanmar. Now we have a space to talk about it, and we will be able to table it as to discuss. To be able to address the problem, you need to recognize the problem. To be able to recognize the problem, you need to have a space. Now we have a space. So maybe next time we will be able to address some of the issues, at least having a discussion among ourselves in a secured space. COVID-19. What ICHR has done is to provide the guidance in our press release to member states to focus on human rights whenever they develop their program or to address the problem, and keep reminding governments to include human rights in their efforts in number of meetings. Our workshops, our activities, our discussion include this concern. ICHR also has contributed number 8 initiatives in the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, again, to remind member states and ASEAN sectoral bodies, human rights should be at the heart of the responses to COVID-19. ICHR cannot do the national work. That's the responsibility of national government. But we can, at the regional level, as you can see, our foreign ministers try to put together vaccine collaboration of vaccine solidarity, and so on and so on. So this is something that we are trying to do at the regional level. So is it enough to have a regional framework to address the democratic movement? No framework enough to anything, but we should be able to use whatever we have, because the problem is in front of us, like the issue of Myanmar in front of us. If we continue to think about developing framework, then our time, our resources will be used for that framework rather than addressing the problem. Now with the issue of Myanmar, we lack a regional framework, but it is an option whether we want to work on that framework or to address the problem now on tools, mechanism, framework we have. We can list down all the lack of or gap of norms after all this issue finished. But at the moment, I think we need to be able to help people in Myanmar. And similar question on securitization of migrant workers. Currently, ASEAN has the ASEAN consensus on the protection and the promotion of migrant workers. Now, the ACMW, the ASEAN Committee on Migrant Workers, has a work plan in which ICHR also participated in the process of developing and implementing the work plan, and we continue to discuss about it. We put issues of migrant workers in number of issues. The ASEAN Comprehensive Framework, talking about social security for migrant workers during COVID-19 and the other pandemic. We also include the issue of migrant workers on number of plan of action. So migrant workers is not only the responsibility of ACMW, but also all sectoral bodies, relevant sectoral bodies' responsibility, including ICHR. Of course, you cannot expect the result come very quickly because we are 10 countries. We work together, and then we have also consensus decision making. So that is why we need to work step by step. As long as all countries committed, all countries agreed, and we can we can work and walk together one by one. The last one on NGO. My background is also NGO, so I can assure that the role of NGO is very, very important to help mainstream human rights in government activity, government programs, policies. And Indonesia, I think number of countries in Southeast Asia have proved how important the role of civil society in mainstreaming human rights. Also in ICHR. So when we organize number of activities in relation to mainstreaming human rights, we invited civil society to share their views, to share their concerns, to share their experiences. So this kind of concern can be included whenever government develop efforts or measures in relation to mainstreaming human rights in the activities. That Pak Puja. I think I hope I answer all.
Thank you so much, Ibu Yuyun, for your best effort to respond all those very provocative questions. Indeed, it's not so easy to respond comprehensively from A to Z to all those inquiries, because it's all very pertinent questions. Indeed, the problem also not the problem, but here I think in ASEAN, the conventional wisdom that we uphold the consensus. We don't have this practice of voting in ASEAN like in the United Nations. But I think, as you mentioned, Ibu Yuyun, this actually gave a space now for ASEAN as a family to talk, to have a dialogue among each other. Honestly, I hope so. So thank you so much for your efforts. Now I have also some list of questions to Dr. Karine. So you may respond it in one. So I just make a cluster of questions that's put on the chats. This is from Jeff Paran from the Philippines. Given that Southeast Asia is deeply divided between the influence of the East and the West because of its dependency on foreign investments, what can you suggest to the youth of these member states when it comes to a balancing national interest and at the same time contribute to Asean Centrality? Second questions from Muhammad Atala Arshaf. His question is it fair to say that we might be seeing a decline in ASEAN centrality, especially with many East Asian states conducting bilateral agreement excluding ASEAN, which might undermine its regional importance to major superpowers like China and the US? How can ASEAN maintain or even increase its importance in the future in security and trade amidst great powers politics? Also from Alex Beard Swartz, I think he is having Beard with him. How do you see ASEAN centrality in relation to the revival of the Quad security dialogue? I think you mentioned in passing a little bit during your presentation. So over to you, Dr. Karine, 10 minutes probably. Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for these like really critical questions. And then I'm just glad to see that you guys are still young and already kind of able to come up with these like really insightful questions. And also before I address your questions, I want you to encourage you guys to maybe first of all find your passion. And then if the questions that you ask you're actually passionate about, I really encourage you to pursue further. If you can't find a satisfactory answers from me, definitely go ahead do your research, and then even like you can do a like master degree or even PhD degrees on that. So those are like very complicated questions first of all. But to just to address those like the three questions, I think I want to start with the one about foreign investment and ASEAN centrality. So from my interviews, during in 2016, 2017, that I spent a long time in Southeast Asian countries, in Thailand, in Indonesia, and in Singapore. So what I found is that even though Southeast Asian countries are reliant on foreign investment, so that's true. From what I studied on human trafficking issues as well as climate change issues, that you see high reliance on foreign investment to carry out projects. But that does not deny the agency of the Southeast Asian countries. So you see that external agencies to carry out projects in ASEAN, they need to sign, for example, a letter agreement or memorandum of understanding with ASEAN countries. And so through this kind of like negotiations, and also because in ASEAN that every decision has to be based on consensus, and then this kind of like sometimes look like cumbersome and also slow process can actually help ASEAN countries to filter out actors or elements that do not fit with ASEAN's normative structure. So in this process, you see that actually we see that the foreign investment in ASEAN is actually I would say it's a preference multiplying. So this is like a phrase that often used by scholar Evelyn Goh, and then you see that it's not only in the interest of the investors, but also in the interest of ASEAN countries as well. And then that's ASEAN countries definitely have been quite smart in using foreign investment to advance their interests. And also about if ASEAN is experiencing declining centrality. So I think from 2010 to 2011, as I mentioned before, because of the changing power dynamics, this is to a certain extent true. And also you see that even not only powers that they probably negotiating deals by passing ASEAN. Some ASEAN member states, they also start their own initiatives instead of going through ASEAN. And then I think this is going to be some dynamics that we are going to have to live with in the next, I think, 1 to 2 decades, possibly. You see that China is rising, and then also US is that challenge the fundamental interest of US within the region. I think one of the questions also mentioned South Korea, and then so you see just an increasing number of powers actually trying to gain interest in the region. So ASEAN countries can't change them. Like superpowers, major powers will always pursue their interests. And then so what I think can do is that, so actually this is what some leaders have been smartly doing, is to use play the game of the balancing power or the game of hedging, and then to use the power competition to advance the interests of ASEAN countries. So for example, that I think that especially Indonesia is doing quite a lot in promoting ASEAN centrality against the context of power competition. So is it 2019 or 2010 that I think that Indonesia spearheaded in negotiating the ASEAN's outlook on Indo-Pacific. And then so in that declaration, so I think that has been endorsed by all ASEAN countries that they are going to firmly enhance ASEAN centrality in regional affairs. And then so of course this is just a declaration. Exactly what's going to happen to ASEAN centrality is depending on if member states can actually, I think, really maintain their neutrality in international affairs. You see that I know that also Quad, Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, it is like actively engaging Indonesia and Vietnam within the region in order to counterbalance the influence of China. And then so I feel yeah, so it's really for the leaders of Indonesia and Vietnam to decide that like what, you know, just whether to choose a side or whether to actually become the zone of neutrality. So I feel like this situation is full of uncertainties. ASEAN has experience of Cold War. During the Cold War, it was a theater of conflict. It actually has experience of managing like just a competition of major powers, but that was a long time ago. I actually look forward to see that if this time that it would be actually more successful in managing the relationships, actually taking use of these competitions and then providing the forum to reduce misunderstandings between major powers, be the brokerage, be the bridge, be the buffer, and then to help like maintain peace not only within Asia Pacific but also the world. So it is going to be challenging, but also definitely meaningful task. I think can only accomplished by ASEAN countries. I think that's all the questions. If there are more questions, I'm happy to address later. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karine, for your best effort to cover and to respond all those questions addressed to you. Indeed, the current reality check now in our regions is actually on the concept of Indo-Pacific. Is something very, very interesting, because it's not only the concept of Indonesia now. There are also other concepts from the Australia, from the US, even from Japan, how this concept of Indo-Pacific could be intertwined and also to be strengthened each other for the future ASEAN, especially on the strengthening of the ASEAN centrality. Now, I give the floor to Padio. There are a couple of questions also addressed to him from Isa Sofia Robin. And her question actually, how can corporate industries and educational institutions engage the youth more in participating in Southeast Asian studies? How can the youth become more involved in regional participation when there are limited opportunities available in their local countries? The second question is from Yasuke in Japan. I would like to know your view, in addition to the fundamental problem that may young people cannot take proper education for a variety of reasons. Even those who are well educated are struggling to find work due to the pandemic. So competition is likely to play out in the higher skilled graduates, e.g. Those who have digital skills. How do you think we can approach this vicious circle? The third question from Krishna Ahnaf from Indonesia. Does a high or low youth population in ASEAN member states also affects the unemployment rates? Well, I saw also questions related to SDGs. I don't know whether Patio would like to address this issue. And also questions from Aloysius Prayogo, from Indonesia. I've seen the social media become the most successful tools for education right now, but we have to realize that data and information streams freely through global network, and we see lots of hoax recently. How we can keep promoting education through social media, but still assure that kids are not seeing bad information. So those are four questions addressed to you, Pak Dio Tobing. Over to you.
Thank you very much for delivering the questions, Pak Puja. Indeed, these are very important and timely questions that youth needs to address and needs to be able to take account of in trying to, or at least also participating in or adapting. Currently, we're all still adapting. It's been 1.5 years we're in this situation, but our adaptation is still in the process. So with regard to the first question on the corporate industry and how can the youth themselves, take part or collected as workforce. Indeed, these are very issue that is not only experienced in one ASEAN member state, or it even addressed all ASEAN member states. And the corporatization for IR, new industry, e-commerce have emerged, for instance, in Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand. But the digital divide in itself is, among ASEAN member states is still very high. We cannot see ASEAN as one single entity that have similar capability and adoption of youth in the workforce. What we need in Indonesia, perhaps, is still something that needs to be taken off as something future related in Cambodia, for instance, or in Myanmar. For those people who are struggling with the current national scale level of conflict, for instance. So, corporate is not something untouchable. ASEAN, in my perspective, should engage more as an institution with private entities, because ASEAN cannot do it alone. ASEAN sees corporate as their partners. We are currently in the process of mapping out what skills are needed for youth today and tomorrow. What skills need to be adapted? And in relation to the question about the spread of hoaxes, using social media as the most effective tools, but the spread of misinformation and disinformation is also there. We should look at how we perceive digital literacy as a tool, or digital literacy as a goal. Digital literacy, perhaps for Indonesia, Singapore, or Myanmar, we are in the process of tackling both. But in terms of hoaxes, misinformation, and in terms of strengthening the capacity of youth, But in some countries, perhaps the access, the ability to, typing on Microsoft Word, to surf online the internet, trying to find the information, not the right information, but the information per se, is still something that is still struggled with. So from a helicopter view, these are issues that, extremely fragmented and needs to be addressed by ASEAN. But this is not a one day problem that could be solved. In the pandemic, in this situation, we're all surprised. If I could, for example, take the analogy of a boat. We are all in a boat, but we face different disasters. Perhaps for Singapore, a small, tiny member state, the wave that they experience is not as biggest as for those who are living in Myanmar. Our boat is the same, but our disaster, the wind that we experience are different from one country to the other. And there's one question with regard to SDGs, and can we fulfill SDGs of 2030? Well, I think this question, it is unfair to try to answer these questions only from the view of ASEAN and ASEAN member states, because not only ASEAN is extremely having difficulty in achieving this SDGs. There has been study, research, explanation on how the pandemic could potentially refer countries back even way forward before the SDGs has been trying to be formulated. So we're all in a setback, but we're all in this together so that we could, stand hand in hand and at least try to find what are the most effective medicine that is that effective for one country, but not for the other, but we at least identify what is the most effective one for each country. And how can youth take part in a very limited opportunities that we have in ASEAN member states? The amount of initiatives that we experience or we have in ASEAN in itself or in ASEAN member states are different. Perhaps we are more grateful here in Indonesia because we are in the capital. But when we look at Indonesia, Indonesia is not only Jakarta. Indonesia is also Moluccas Island. Indonesia is also Papua. Perhaps some of you see, oh yeah, well, Indonesia, a very big island with more opportunities, but that is not the case. Other people, other students in very small islands, remote area, they don't know what ASEAN is. So, I think it is fair to say that we're all experiencing the amount of opportunities that we have. But keep trying. That's only the word that I can share with you, because if it does not come from within ourselves, the opportunity does not come to offer us. We have to continue explore, be mindful, be explorative in looking at these opportunities. There's also another question related to the opportunities provided by the AUN. Is the AUN providing more opportunities for school, for university students to address or to be mobile and to take part, but also at the same time problematic because scholarships are not provided by the ASEAN governments. I think the role of the Secretariat, the role of the SOM leaders on youth are to formulate more effective policies on how to make all these opportunities more inclusive, not only those youth in the ASEAN capitals, but also those youth in remote and in rural areas, but also, and most importantly, those youth who are part of the indigenous communities, who are very much spread out in ASEAN member states. I think those are questions that I could possibly wrap up in this very limited sharing session. But if you have further questions, I'll write it down how we can connect, and I hope I could be helpful to all of you to take a follow-up questions later on. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Pak Puja. Over to you.
Thank you, Padio, for very inspiring response indeed, especially for the youth. Indeed, this is not easy to fill in the message, especially what the youth can do in the future. Because of the interest of time, we cannot actually to continue the Q&A sessions. However, I just would like to request each of the panelists to provide a concluding 1 minute remarks. I know you don't have crystal balls with you, but as we are celebrating 54th years of ASEAN today, and ASEAN has elapsed more than 50 years now, more than half century now. So how you project ASEAN in another 50 years from now? So what your crystal ball said about this? May I start from Padio, and then Dr. Karine, and then Ibu Yuyun. 1 minute, please, each of you.
Thank you very much, Pak Puja. I think in the 54th celebration of ASEAN, it is our momentum to reflect on the situation that we are here now as youth, to reflect that the opportunities that we may experience, so those who are in this room together, and to reflect those who are unable to access information that we do, but also to reflect on how can we grasp, solidify our forces among youths to ask, to advocate for, to continue the struggle in trying to make ASEAN more and more inclusive day by day. ASEAN is not created in one day. ASEAN is an institution that continues to evolve over times, and there are many rooms for more evolution in ASEAN structures, in ASEAN and regional policy-making process. So what I can say to all of you is that you simply, not simple, but simply, keep your motivation these days in these very difficult times on fire to build the better days for us and for youth who are underprivileged. Thank you very much.
Great message, Pak Dio Tobing. Thank you so much. Dr. Karine?
Yes. Okay. I'm just trying to think that how to just summarize my information within 1 minute. I think what I want to say is that the ASEAN region has a bright future. So as someone that is not from ASEAN, I have just absolutely faith in the development of ASEAN countries. I see that the regional countries that are developing at an unprecedented rate in comparison to other regions in the world. So as the region developing, it's gaining in power, so it's going to it will need to take more responsibilities in contributing to global affairs. Of course, like starting from a regional level and then contributing to the achievement of sustainable development goals, for example, including contributing to climate change, like migration issues and so on. So the region has a lot to offer. For now, just still going back to my presentation that talking about Asean Centrality. So it's that the region has achieved a lot, but still facing quite some challenges. So in the next 1 to 2 decades, really up to ASEAN to actually manage power relations in the region, navigate through these challenges, and then to just offer more to the world. Yeah. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Karine, for very inspiring message, especially how ASEAN should play and should contribute in the global affairs. Ibu Yuyun, over to you.
Thank you, Pak Puja. I do not want to predict what ASEAN going to be, but because that's, I think, the responsibility of our young generation to define what kind of ASEAN you would like to have in the future. But I want to highlight on the way we see ASEAN. It is rather half empty glass. To be full, we need to fill more waters in the glass, and that water's coming from young people, from your vision, from your ideas. So that's I think this is what kind of water, what color of that water, that you will be the one to decide this. And I also would like to see ASEAN development is some kind of a process, and becoming ASEAN, becoming something that you would like to see. We are now as we are because the previous diplomats, the previous government, the previous individual work hard for this. So what we are now doing with ASEAN and for ASEAN, it's not about now, because some people continue to ask about what is the impact on this? What is impact of that? Sometimes we cannot see the impact now. Sometimes we can only see the impact later. That is, I think this kind of long-term view also very important when you work with ASEAN. For those who are working on human rights advocacy, know this very well, that we cannot expect something immediately come as an output, because human rights advocacy take a long time to see the result. And lastly, I also would like to encourage young generation that we know that ASEAN continue to receive a lot of criticism. All criticism are valid, but we should not stop only by criticism, but making criticism as inputs to make ASEAN better, to make ASEAN as what we want. Because despite, and also ASEAN has been predicted as collapse several times, but ASEAN still there and becoming stronger and stronger. It might be working very slow, but it becomes stronger and stronger. And it is up to you whether you want to become part of this movement of building the stronger regional community, or you want to be just watch bystander. So it is, again, this decision should be made by you on what kind of role you want to play and what kind of ASEAN you want to establish later on, and what kind of ASEAN that can serve for generations in the future. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Ibu Yuyun. So very concise concluding remarks indeed. So, well, dear panelists, distinguished friends, colleagues, I think now comes to the end of the show, and the curtain should be put down very, very soon. And but before this closing the event, I just would like to make a very brief summary and wrap up. Probably it's not so comprehensive, but I'm trying to reflect all of those discussions, including the very, very provocative questions. Indeed, I believe we do all agree that this public lecture today is very illuminating and also very thought-provoking. And thank you for the three great panelists that we have today, which gave us a very, very insightful informations and also opportunities for our future. So with this, I believe in ASEAN, understanding this evolving development, we are not talking about cash and carry matters here, because it takes times. In ASEAN, we know about the building blocks, step by step approach. This is, I think, the best way to build a comfort level in our institutions, with the main message that no one left behind. I think this is a very, very strong message for us. And Ibu Yuyun gave a very strong and very crystal clear remark also. This, the history of ASEAN now already gave a lot of space for us to talk, to have a dialogue as a family. This is good, in which before was a taboo even to talk something in a very issue of a particular country. So ASEAN should be always in the driving seat. I think this is very important on how we should maintain the ASEAN centrality, and especially in this ASEAN centrality, how human rights can contribute to the democratizations of the regions, and how human rights-based approach can strengthen the democratizations in the regions. And of course, the transformations both in the human rights and also in the democratization of our regions, hopefully will bring the ASEAN in a level, in the higher plane in the future. So the challenges remains there, but we need an innovative approach to face those challenges. So now, what would be and should be the role of the youth? Of course, education is the prime efforts, should be promoted always, especially as Diotobing emphasized on digital literacy. Youth prove themselves as an agent of change, agents of peace, and they prove their resilience and adaptability against those challenges, including these pandemics. Innovations indeed is required in this respect. Don't forget the youth commitments in maintaining peace in the regions, and youth as a corporate agency should be encouraged in the future. So that's with regard to the pandemic. Of course, we are in the same ocean, but actually we are in different boats. So opportunity given to our regions should be grabbed. And of course, the youth should be more included in the evolving of ASEAN. So as Dr. Karine said, ASEAN bring about actually a bright future. And this should, ASEAN should contribute in the global affairs. And finally, whether this is a half glass empty or half glass full, for me, this is not the questions. The question for the future is, where is the tap? So you should find the tap to fill in those half empty glass. So in the Dutch way of thinking, it's called omdenken, you know, how to find the tap to fill in the half empty glass. So that's all the wrap up for today. And I wish to take this opportunity to thank you all once again for this great public lecture. Hope to see you again sometime in the future in a better circumstances when we can meet in person. I think it's better to have this opportunity and to visit Yogyakarta and the physical UGM again, especially the ASEAN Study Center. Thank you so much. Wish you all the best and stay safe. I give back the floor to the MC, Ibu Yulida. Over to you, Ibu.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Puja, for guiding us through our lecture today. I would also like to thank our esteemed speakers for sharing your thought-provoking insights. I believe today's discussion has been nothing but fruitful as ASEAN sets off for a new year full of bigger and greater opportunities. And to echo Pak Puja very recently, an ASEAN that leaves no one behind. So once again, thank you very much. As our event today has come to an end, allow me to address our IE participants with some information which may be of use. For IE participants, kindly refer to the chat column to access the mandatory online attendance form, which we have provided. Kindly fill it in and submit as soon as possible. And for our participants joining us on YouTube, kindly refer to the chat section also on YouTube to access your respective e-certificates. Lastly, for IE participants, we kindly ask you to tune into your WhatsApp group and Zoom channel for further announcements. And with that, the lecture today is concluded. On behalf of the committee and the ASEAN Study Center, we'd like to thank you for your active participation throughout the discussion. Stay safe, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
Stay
you.
healthy, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy
everyone.
ASEAN Day.
Selalu Pak Puja.
Thank you.
Great job.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
And
much.
happy ASEAN Day.
Happy ASEAN
Happy ASEAN Day.
Happy ASEAN.
Happy
Happy
ASEAN
ASEAN Day.
Day.
Thank you all.
Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you,
Happy
everyone.
and healthy
Dadah.
ASEAN Day.
Thank you,
Happy ASEAN Day.
Dr. Karine.
Well.